I'm Natalie Nugent-O'Shea with Celtic Junction Arts Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, in conversation with Kathy Scott of the Trailblazery in Ireland. I recently became aware of an amazing program that she has founded called Scoil Scairte. Kathy, I wonder, would you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and about this program?
Natalie, it's such an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here. I'll say a tiny bit about the Trailblazery, which is in a way the mother ship, founded over 10 years ago at a time of, global crisis. And as I look back and have been over these last few years at the founding, I realized I'm kind of good. I love a good crisis. So it felt like at that time a clarion call to bring together people who blaze trails from the most, small kind of maybe unobvious people in Ireland who are blazing trails, and then people who are right out there under the spotlight. And we decided to host live events all over the country in very unusual locations, from courthouses, Masonic lodges, cathedrals, festivals, on these people who were kind of making waves or making change in Ireland at that time. And then, like a lot of people, a lot of our work became online, and particularly at the time, of course, of the global pandemic. And when that crisis hit, I kind of thought, I think I have something up my sleeve ready for this. And I was always really interested in the hedge school movement, which is after the penal laws in Ireland, when education was completely banned. Our ancestors took to the fields, to forests, by mountains, to places in deep nature, to preserve the culture and to learn together. And so I was interested in what would that look like in an online world. And Zoom was the perfect answer. So we started launching hedge schools from really March 2020 for a whole year. And it was kind of the idea of calling together, convening concerned global citizens about these bewildering times, but also offering solace and comfort. And we worked with the Medicine Wheel of the Year in these lands, also known as the Celtic Wheel of the Year, and worked with the kind of gifts and challenges of those seasons. And for that whole year, I often introduced myself as Scoil, like Diagwith, Coit Scott is Adam Dom, and a couple of focal, a couple of words, token words, if I'm honest, throughout those courses, and then might end, with some words as well. And it felt a little bit inauthentic. I also, my great friend and colleague Manco McGann published the book 32 Words for Field during lockdown. And it completely was a clarion call for me as well. I mean, even talking about it, my whole body and cells come alive. And so a year into prototyping the hedge school, with people from all over the world joining us, decided to really bring the Irish language into our cultural offering. And as I look back now, what happens a lot on these lands anyway is that when we produce cultural work, we often leave the language, some people use the word ghettoize the language is left out of that central offering. And as soon as we brought our Tonga Dukas, our native tongue, into the center, and Moncton became my collaborative partner, it kind of it took off. People joined from the island of Ireland who had maybe a block around the language in some way. It was, there's a long history to the language that kind of works in rhythm with the collective trauma patterns that we've experienced in Ireland. And the language itself has almost been completely wiped out, but it's on this kind of resurge at the moment. And so we brought the language right into the heart of what we offered. And people joined, as I was saying, from the island of Ireland, who had a kind of a difficult or maybe turbulent relationship with the language and wanted to come back at it from a place of beauty and a deeper connection to what the language can offer. People joined, like yourself, from people who have Irish ancestry or heritage, first, second, third, fourth generation. And then people joined from places like Russia and Japan, and we can't quite get our heads around. I
Oh,
think
it's
it's
so exciting.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's people who are kind of culturally curious, or a lot of people said, I have no idea how I signed up for this. And it has completely blown my universe apart or blown my heart open, which is what we're always aiming to do at the Trailblazer.
Well, those are both part and parcel of the same thing, I think. Blowing your heart open and the universe at the same time. As we manifest it, within ourselves and the actions we take and everything that we do, can you tell me a little bit about how Scoil Scairte has really answered that call to the touchstone? I know you call them spirals, and so you're on your third spiral at the moment.
You know what? It just develops. It lets me know, I think, what it wants to be. It has its own set of characteristics and its own way. We're about to, as you say, step into our third spiral. At the moment, the format is this deliberately a 9-week deep immersion into the heart and soul, I would say, of Irish culture, including language, heritage, identity, deep ecology, and creativity. And we showcase guides every week who kind of bring us into their world. And there are people who are native Irish speakers, and they're also kind of creative culture makers. And they kind of open a window into their world. We also have a stunning moon tour so that we are learning some vocabulary, but it's taught in a very different way to how a lot of people might have experienced. Because I feel that because we have such a long and deep entangled history of colonization, that when we gained our independence and Ireland became a free state, the government really tried to revive the language. The language was almost wiped out after the famine when, 2 million people, 1 million went to mostly the US and another million were wiped out, and they were mostly native Irish speakers. So this ancient language, one of the oldest languages on the planet, was really in decline. But I think what happened along the way is that in the enthusiasm of making it compulsory, it had been beaten out of people when we were colonized, and then it was beaten back into people, which is a very entangled experience when you look at a long line of ancestry. And so I think there's a lot of trauma around how the language has survived and how the language has been taught. So we were coming at it from a very different way. Moncon really shining a light on these extraordinary words. He is, with his Tamagotchi Gaeilge project, kind of bringing our attention back to wonder and awe, what these words, because the words bring us into many realms of consciousness. And then I'm coming along with my trauma and post-traumatic growth hat on, having studied with Thomas Hubel and now the great Gabor Mate. I'm curious about how could you create a cultural program that has all of these ingredients. It's almost like baking a cake. So it's very close to nature. We do meditations, there's like body scans. We teach it, but it's in community and there isn't a set test for getting it right. And there's also a kind of a lot of joy, and we work with quite slow time because we live in such an escalated world that's quite frenetic. So we want when people come to join us, it's like we're back in those hedge schools and we're close to nature and we're sitting in close and listening to what the language, and I think the language is really showing off in this course. She or it or he really wants to be in there in center stage. And I had a great aha moment, actually, Natalie. I was writing a piece the other day about what I'm learning studying with Gabor Mate at the moment. And something that he's really, really strong in is that we are not our feelings, that we host all of these complex feelings and emotions from anger and rage all the way up to joy, the joys and the sorrows, but that we are not those. We're hosting them and they're passing through and we don't have to identify with them. And I was like, hang on a sec, it's the exact same in the Irish language. Tá brón orm, tá áthas orm means the feeling is coming and it's washing over me, but I am not that feeling. So as some of the great Indigenous writers and teachers are showing us, there's a consciousness in these native tongues, these mother tongues, that can help us see and experience the world in a whole new way.
I think one of the really unique ways you've done that is with some of the guides that you've brought through. Of course, Monica and we were delighted to have hosted him just this past spring, and we really, felt that energy and had such a powerful response in our community to his generosity with the language and his sharing of it. And he does it so easily with that bilingual passage from one breath to the next and one moment to the other. But you've got some really exciting guides that you've brought through that really do encompass all these different aspects of Irish culture, of arts, of nature, and really touching on some, I think, important moments that even discuss issues like climate or colonization, which is part of what I think, with Gabor speaking, his myth of normal. Unfortunately, colonization is what we're perceiving as normal because it's all around us. So how do we undo that, and how do we name all the things and bring that in? These guides have done a really unique job of that. Will you talk a little bit about who you've chosen and why and what they bring to the program?
For sure. And I'll speak a little bit about who's coming, in our next spiral. And I use the word spiral in a cognizance of honoring the ancestral lines here. Our ancestors worked with cycles and spirals, the rhythms of the earth. So yeah, we kind of move each spiral brings new information. We've had extraordinary, like we've had actors, we've had people like Timmy Creed, who brought some beautiful storytelling from West Kerry. We're in people's homes. And when I approach, and I've worked in the arts and cultural world, like yourself, for a long time, it's really important to me that the artist's work is valued, their preparation. So they really work on bringing, kind of, to use their best self, and also that love of the language. We've had hip hop artists obviously Kneecap, who are really, exploding in the world right now. Foragers, beekeepers, beautiful artists who are, coming at the language from different approaches, different perspectives. And we also always include, somewhere in the middle of that 9-week journey, an Indigenous wisdom keeper from a culture that's not the Irish or Irish American culture, so that can hold a mirror to us. So that has been Mairead Newden, who's from the Anishinaabe culture, and a poet, and just showing the beautiful close relationship between the Irish language and the Anishinaabe language. And also Dr. Bayo Kamalafe, who was with us for our last spiral, who's an extraordinary poet, professor, shapeshifter, myth maker. And this year, that's Emma Dabiri in our next spiral coming, who has written some extraordinary books about race and decolonization. So those characters who come in kind of halfway through shake it all up a little bit. We're experimenting a little bit in this coming spiral about shining more of a spotlight on the kingdom of Kerry. So anybody who may have Kerry heritage, I kind of see it like, when you walk the Camino, pilgrimage in this side of the world, you get these shell stamps on your passport. And I kind of see that maybe if you have Kerry lineage or roots or heritage and you've never come to Ireland, this is a little way into people's living rooms. We filmed a film series with Mon Cohen on some stunning locations. We've got singers from the Blasket Islands. We've got folklorists, the great Billy McFlynn and his gorgeous partner, Muireann, who's an extraordinary Irish language singer. And so, yeah, there's a good kind of Kerry representation. And we try and make sure that the demographic is quite wide, that from quite young. We've got a beautiful Sudanese woman called Sarah Babaker, who's studying in Princeton at the moment, who has written a beautiful paper about the term Andini Gurum, which means the blue people, which was a term for Black people or African American people in the Irish language. And it has been questioned, that term, but she brings it to a very ancient root about the blue cloaks that people from the North African deserts would have worn, these indigo blue capes. And so she's written this beautiful essay. She also speaks Irish, so quite unusual contributors. And then something that's very close to my heart is the sessions are usually around 90 minutes long. Every Thursday we meet. And then we've organized a mehel, an online community membership space where it's a little bit much less, much more casual. We meet there on a Tuesday night to practice speaking. So we're actually getting our tongues around it and letting the tongue hit the palate and practicing, bringing the words in. And on the Thursday nights, I used to lead these meditations that would kind of bring us in touch with the language and into our bodies so that we could kind of have a body scan or a mindfulness practice in a bilingual way. And I really, really enjoyed that. So I spent this summer, I've written two kind of long, we're calling them Imrama immersions. So they're like journeys into the body, but also mythology. And just as in the Celtic myths, the Imramas were when people went out in boats into the other world and came back, a bit like the hero's journey. So I've recorded two of those with a really gorgeous composer who lives near me here in Wicklow called Brian Crosby. And it was just amazing. I'd written the first one, which when delivered is about 45 minutes long. So it's literally lying down and immersing yourself. And it also is catering for different learning styles. And I started talking about the 9 waves from the myth and how the 9th wave around Ireland is a supernatural boundary. And I sent it and I thought he's either going to think I'm barking. I've no idea where this is going to land for him. And he came back and he'd composed a whole score with 9 notes. I think it's absolutely beautiful, the detail. So we've been nerding out in his studio and I'm really excited to offer that, because even that alone, it's a relaxed way to learn. And you and I have spoken about sometimes within the current education models, there's pressure for performance and productivity and results, whereas I would actually prefer someone to be lying out in nature with earphones in and receive the language. Yeah.
Well, it's a very deconstructed concept, because language, I think we think of it as such a heady thing, and intellect, and it's bound even if you think about it with our tongue. But the mother tongue, the motherland, is a much deeper, more immersive thing, and so to approach it with this whole body is I think revolutionary, and yet it makes ridiculous sense if you touch down within yourself. And then how to share that. I think you guys do it so uniquely. One of the elements of the program, which you mentioned, is to do the mehel. And I think it's really quite beautiful, of course, in its word, in its effort, in the approach that you use for that. And it's such a huge bonus to the Scoil Scairte program. Will you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah. It was something that we always try and add. I sit with my amazing team and we always go, okay, what are we learning? And a phrase I picked up from Brené Brown, what does done look like? These kind of, questions that we work with as a team. So we were learning after Scoil Scairte Hain, the first outing, which was like a rocket taking off, that, oh, hang on, people actually need to go into little circles. We thought we'd create Shomra Biogs, little rooms. And it was really hard to manage that on those live calls, because then the group would get, kind of dissipated. And so a key learning for Scoil Scairte though was, well, let's set up a membership community. People can join it for the whole year. But when people attend Scoil Scairte, we'll set up learning circles, and they're led by some of our guides. And it's a chance to wrap your mouth and your head and your notions around like BHs and some of the phrasing and spellings that might seem alien, and that's just because we're getting used to it. But the idea of the mehel itself, just for anybody who may not know, it's that idea of when people come together to raise a barn, like when the community will come together and bring in the crops or save the hay. It's very much still part of the Irish culture and most Indigenous land-based cultures, when they would come together and they might eat together afterwards. So the idea with the mehel is that we're all rolling up our sleeves and we're in there together to try and be with this beautiful ancient language, which I think really wants to come in, particularly at this moment on the planet. Yeah.
I agree with you. It's doing it in such a unique way. In the irony, with the spirals, with the mehel, is that in the dispersion of our world, of the pandemic, of our dispersion into our own living rooms, like we're sitting in our own homes, you
Yeah.
know, at the moment, speaking with each other from 4,000 miles away, that the irony of all of this is it's brought the community together to raise that bar and to raise the love of the language and to put those sounds out there.
Mm.
One of the things I love when we have a group at the Celtic Junction Arts Center, whether it's a musical group or a dancing group or a speaking group, it could be theater, it could be many things. What we're doing is we're putting those sounds out into the walls, into the room, into the air, and it's soaking it up and it's
Mhm.
bouncing back and forth. We change each other with our energy. With this program, you've managed to do that with a world community
Mm.
and to bring
Mm.
everybody together and to find a way not to be stuck in this kind of two-dimensional
Mm.
talking at each other, but to really bring people's essence forward and to help them connect when they were struggling to, and to help
Mm.
them maybe reach back into that ancient rhythm and the sounds of a
Mm.
language that they haven't had access to. And it's a vibration, I think, that's changing bodies, it's changing
Mm.
community, it's changing understanding. And it's really incredibly exciting. I could talk
Oh,
to you all day about this.
it's
But
really,
if,
really moved me. Sorry, I just want to say what you just said really moved me. I feel emotion in my heart. And I think it's the word resonance.
hmm,
And there's a resonance to this ancient language that is there's a frequency, or it can be amplified, and that might sound pretty out there, but it's very experiential. It's tangible when you're in the field of it. And I think we're learning that we can gather as global citizens all over the world and find belonging and meaning in these circles, just like our ancestors would have, you know? Yeah, and also Irish is a very playful language. There's crack in it, and I
it's
mean
talky, isn't
crack
it?
in that sense. And I wanted to also mention the music, because you mentioned music, and to think of like people like Rising Appalachia and Earlo Linor, there's extraordinary musicians bringing us into their home as well. And the music is so important to me, because that kind of 20 minutes towards the end of each session allows that kind of scintillating any energies. It allows everything to drop and for us to really kind of land, which is important. Yeah.
Well, it's transformative work. Um, and it's, I suppose, along the lines of to be the change that you wish to see, which seemed so difficult as we've been isolated or without our communities over this course of this period. And to have that access is the transformation that enacts it within ourselves and then within the people that we come into contact with, and even 4,000 miles away, you know,
Mm.
between the two of us here. So
Mm.
if you were going to encapsulate what Scoil Scairte is for somebody who's never heard of it, what's your one or two sentence pitch that I could that we could share, and we could make sure that people really get a sense of what that could be for them?
Scoil Scairte is a cultural learning program that weaves together ideas around culture and heritage, language, identity, creativity, and meaning making for the times that we're living in.
Well, that's just beautiful. I can't wait to join you in that community again. Kat, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Again, this is Celtic Junction Arts Center, meeting with Kat Scott of the Trailblazery and the third spiral upcoming of the Hedge School, Scoil Scairte, which
Mm.
you can find in the link here.
Gurmila Mahagad, Natalie.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.